Greetings, class. This is Professor Chuck Slemp. I teach one of the various contracts courses here at Regent University. So I hope that you're enjoying your class. And the purpose of this video is to go over the midterm examination in advance of week 4's midterm exam. Now, if you're in my class and the other sections, you will have by now completed the quizzes, quiz 1 and 2, and they each have various questions that you have gone through and taken. Those same questions, or some of those same questions, may reappear on your midterm test. So I'm not going to give you the answers for what those questions asked. But what I will do in this video is kind of go over some of the topics reviewed and tested on quizzes 1 and 2 in weeks 2 and 3. So that when you see those questions again in week 4, you may be able to have a better understanding. So I am asking you, now number 1, the quizzes are open book, open note. So you can take notes during this video and during the past videos. The hope is that after reviewing your prior work and this video and the other videos and your readings, that you'll be able to make a great question. Now, as you noticed in the 2 quizzes, number 1 and 2, there is a mix. This is a master's level law course, so we have a mix of just basic definitions, multiple choice, testing your understanding of the materials that you've read. For instance, the second quiz, there was a question, what does the formula Q plus A plus C equals K stand for? And just about everybody got that right because it was in one of our lectures, and I believe it was in our readings as well. So you got to look at your notes. Now, some folks missed that question, and if you had read the readings for the week or watched the video, you would have known the answer. So you've got all the time in the world, provided that your internet browser doesn't time out, to take the midterm. So you may see that question again. You may see others from the first 2 quizzes. For instance, what does an offer mean? Well, the definition of an offer. You can go to our readings and you go to the lecture and you can find the definition that matches that particular question. The mirror image rule states blank, and there's various choices, and you can go through and pick those particular choices to match it. So I'm not going to go over those particular questions because we've already gone over those on your first videos and your readings. What I do think a lot of folks had trouble with, and that is the analysis part. Applying the rules to a set of facts to receive a result. Now, I will be the first to admit, those are tough. Those are difficult questions. The reason why they're difficult, they're modeled after law school and bar exam questions. And I understand you're in a time constraint. There's no easy answer in the book. You're actually going to have to use the knowledge of what you read and apply it to the questions. And some folks got those right. Some folks struggled with those. Not everybody got every one of those right. So thus, if you're in my section of the class, I'm going to be curving the grades up to reflect the level of difficulty of some of those particular questions. On the midterm, you may see those questions again. So let's go over a few of them and kind of put 2 and 2 together how you might answer those questions. So let's turn our attention to the first quiz in week 2. And I'm going to go to my screen here. If you're tracking along, you can actually pull up the quizzes. I don't know if you realized you could do that. If you go to my grades in the Grade Center, you should be able to click on the quiz and pull up that one, that particular quiz, and see what you got wrong. At least that's my understanding of how the software works. If you can't figure that out, it's okay. It's designed to not show you the correct answer because some of these questions are going to be used over again on the midterm. So you're going to have a second chance at them. So it would be unfair to give you the correct answer. Instead, I want you to be able to take what you've learned and apply it to the question. So let's look at the first one. The first example here is landowner offered his best friend buyer 40-acre lot for $4,000. Buyer accepted the offer and paid landowner $4,000 for the 40 acres. Unknown to landowner, buyer planned to give a gift of $4,000, and unknown to buyer, the landowner had planned to give buyer the land. Have they formed a contract? So remember, when we're looking at contracts, without answering this question for you, when looking at a contract, you need to look at the outward manifestations of the parties, not their subjective intent, what they thought, but their outward actions. And thus, did buyer and landowner outwardly manifest, signal to each other and to the world, to a reasonable outsider looking on, that they were induced to give their promises? To constitute consideration, and this basically tests whether you understand the consideration rule and a bargain for exchange versus gifts. To have a formed contract, you have to have consideration and offer acceptance based upon what a reasonable outside observer would see looking at the contract. Some of the things that you need to remember is to constitute consideration, a promise or returned promise must be bargained for, and the performance or return promise is bargained for if it is sought by the promisor in exchange for his promise and that which is given. So the performance here, and looking at the external manifestations rather than the undisclosed mental state, is what you need to do in order to solve that problem. And you've got a couple different questions here. Is it a gift? Does it lack consideration? And that kind of thing. So notice in the answer, you don't have any subjective or objective intent. But if you watch the lectures and you listen to the video and read, you will be able to solve that using the outward manifestations of intent of the parties and not the subjective intent of the parties in their head. Let's look at the next one, and that is the one about the police officer. Officer, who's a police officer, was off duty and went on vacation outside of her state, where she's not authorized to investigate crimes. She went to a state where father was offering a $1,000 reward for his missing son. So officer saw the flyer in the airport. As soon as she stepped out of her hotel on the first day of the visit, officer saw the missing child, scooped him up, and officer delivered the child to the father, who said nothing. Officer would have returned the child regardless of whether father offered the reward or not. Father reiterated the promise to pay the $1,000 and promised to mail the check to the officer with a thank you note. Well, father changed his mind and didn't. He did write a very nice thank you card, but left out the $1,000. So now the officer is suing the father for breach of contract. Who's going to win? Will the officer win? And so, in order to solve this problem, you're going to have to use, again, your analysis. We're going to have to see, is there an enforceable contract? And this, knowing that we're in weeks, for this, quiz 1, week 2, we're looking at whether there was offer, whether there's acceptance. All right, being able to solve that makes you think back to the lecture and the reading. Think back to whether you have a legal duty that is being offered, whether a person who has a legal duty already has an obligation to do it, and if there's no legal duty performed, was there consideration? Did the officer do something that he wouldn't have done, right? And the very requirement of consideration might be satisfied if that duty is doubtful or the subject of an honest dispute, or etc. So, did the officer owe a duty to the father, legal duty? No. He was acting as a civilian, right? So you're analyzing it that way. Could he claim the reward? Well, think about it in terms of and we read about this, are rewards, whereas they're not specific to any certain party, are they an offer to the public? And contrast this in the reading to advertisements. So this question here is going to test your knowledge, like the rescued dog or the rescued cat poster will pay reward for the cat. Is it open to the entire public, or is it like an advertisement, an invitation to bid? I think if you go back and reread your notes and the reading, that you'll be able to solve that and find out, was there an enforceable contract? If there was, the father has to pay the officer. Okay, I hope this is helping so far. Let's look at the one about the painter and homeowner. The painter agreed to paint homeowner's house for $1,000, and painter promised that the job would be done in a couple weeks. After the first week, without excuse, the painter threw all the paint in the river and refused to finish the job. And so homeowner naturally didn't want anybody else to finish the job because the painter had a good reputation for being the best in the city, despite the fact that he would waste all that paint and throw it away. Homeowner then offered painter an extra $500 if he'd come back and finish the job. So painter purchased some new paint for $200. Then he finished the project. However, homeowner later refused to pay any more than the original $1,000 that was negotiated. Can the painter successfully sue the homeowner, and when? So this is going to question and test your knowledge on the concept of past consideration. And remember, when looking at this, does the painter have a duty, like we were talking about previously with the police officer? Does he have a duty that he's already being compensated for, or has already negotiated or bargained for? Well, if he had a duty that he was already paid or negotiated or bargained for, he can't then use that same consideration, that same bargain, to support more money, right? That's the rule of past consideration. Go back and reread that section. So a promise to do what or more than is legally obligated to do is not valid consideration. And thus, if that rule is applied here, would the painter have promised to paint the house already? If so, it can't be supported by new consideration. I'll leave that at that so you can read that one. Let's look at the planner and the client. Signed a writing promising for, I guess this is some kind of financial planner to serve as the client's financial advisor for the next 5 years, starting May 1st. Client agreed to pay $500 a month, and the writing included the following terms. Client reserves the right to terminate the agreement at any time within 1 month's notice. Has the planner received sufficient consideration? Well, this is a kind of common contract, right? So basically, you're going to go all the way back to the sufficiency of consideration, and we're talking about a bargain, right? A promise or apparent promise is not considered consideration if you're not actually promising anything, right? It's illusory. Did this guy actually promise to do something? And did he do it or not do something else in exchange for what's been bargained? That's the question. If that has happened, then you've got consideration to support a contract. If that has not happened, then you don't have consideration. So I'm going to leave it at that. Look back at your consideration and the question of illusory promises. Now, it might appear illusory, right? It might appear like an illusion, but did the client promise to do something? And did the planner promise to do something? If so, you've got a bargain, right? And then it may not be it may be enforceable up to the 1 month, right? All right, let's move forward. See, there's a lot of these questions here that now, once we go through them, they seem simple. I know that a lot of folks struggled with a lot of these, and I think that just makes sure you need to go back when you're answering these. Try to pick out the issue that jumps out and go back and review the section of your book that applied or the lecture. 2 years ago, the bank made a $100,000 loan to a corporation. Right. Last month, when the loan was still outstanding, the corporation asked for additional $50,000 to the bank. Well, the bank agreed and provided that shareholder who owned the majority of the corporation's shares guaranteed the entire $150,000 debt. Right, both of them combined. Now, the shareholder signed what's called a surety agreement. Remember, we talked about sureties. In fact, we're talking about them a little bit this week in terms of the statute of frauds, right? Guaranteeing the indebtedness of the other party. And the bank made the $50,000 loan to the corporation. Is the shareholders' agreement to guarantee the corporation's debt supported by consideration? Okay, a lot of people missed this. And don't get confused in the fact that there was already a contract between A and B, between corporation and bank. Because the question here is not about those two. The question is about the shareholder. Did the shareholder's agreement to serve as a cosigner on a new loan? Well, if it was just the two parties from the beginning, well, you've already got consideration, you've already got a bargain, and coming back and doing it is like asking the other party to come back and pay extra money, right? But if you've got somebody new that's also negotiating, shareholder is agreeing to give surety. I promise to pay their debt if they don't. And the bank is promising, okay, if you give me that promise, I'll give you your people $50,000. So that should be your answer without telling you what the answer is. A promise to act as a surety for the promise of another requires consideration. And in this instance, I'll just leave it at that. Let's keep moving. Let's talk about the student, a college junior, who agreed to provide landscaping for property owner for $400 a week over 10 weeks during the summer. The student's goal was to raise $4,000, the value of his full contract, to pay for his tuition during the fall. After about 3 weeks, the owner was really happy and said, let's pay you $600 for the remaining 7 weeks. Well, owner and student are considering two different ways to document the agreement. Owner and student both sign a written agreement modifying the payment term of the prior agreement, or owner and the student can sign a written agreement terminating the prior agreement and entering into a new agreement for the 7 weeks for $600. Assuming that the student didn't rely on the promise to pay the $600, in which the two approaches, which of the two approaches will a court conclude the owner has to pay and that it's supported by consideration? All right, so this one is asking you to analyze two separate agreements, two separate contracts, proposed contracts, one in which they enter a modification and the other in which they terminate it and write an entirely new contract. So the question becomes a question of when can you modify a contract? Absent any change of circumstances, is there a lack of consideration? And for this, you need to go and read the Restatement of Contracts, Section 89, which says modification without consideration is allowed in limited circumstances. However, the parties may rescind their original agreement at any time, right? Parties are free to do that and come back and renegotiate. You can't do a promise for something you've already promised to do, But if you are doing something brand new, waiving certain rights, uh, imposing new legal responsibilities and legal duties, you can contract for services at any new rate after it's been previously terminated. In short, you've got to see whether the modification is supported by consideration, rescission, and you need to look at the restatement for your answer. I think that will give you one of those two, and maybe what I've said has kind of led you down that road, at least a way to analyze it. So after a storm, a homeowner who lives in a rural area contracted with a worker for the worker to clear a path from Main Street to the homeowner's property, getting rid of all those dead branches and all the trees out of the way in exchange for $500. A simple contract, right? The path would necessarily pass by and thus create access to a neighbor's property as well. So after the agreement with the homeowner and before the worker began the work, the neighbor agreed to pay worker a bonus of $300 in exchange for the worker finishing up the path. The worker cleared the path. And so now, homeowner paid worker $500, and in addition, worker wants to get that money that neighbor paid, and neighbor doesn't want to pay it. So what is the most likely result if the neighbor sues the worker? You need to go back and analyze again the consideration of pre-existing duty. Homeowner negotiated contract with worker. We got an enforceable contract there, right? And worker owed a duty to homeowner. Did worker negotiate a contract with the neighbor? So that's your question. If there was consideration and an agreement, that is a bargain for exchange, doing something that you're not already legally obligated, don't have a duty to do, and then negotiate payment to do that, then you've got a contract. If you are negotiating payment for something you already are obligated to do, then you don't have a contract. And thus, if that were the case, the promise to pay the neighbor wouldn't be considered by consideration, wouldn't be supported by consideration if that's the way you analyze it. So take a look at that. A lot of people missed that one. Go from there. All right. Let's skip ahead to the one about landowner telling a friend that if I promise to give you $1,000 to initiate a lawsuit against this oil company, if you promise to give me $1,000 to initiate a lawsuit against the oil company, I'll give you $50,000 when I recover from the oil company. The friend accepts this offer, and landowner is afraid that this is not a valid contract because of the unequal values of consideration. So is the landowner's promise of $50,000 for the promise of $1,000 supported by consideration? And so this is going to test the adequacy of consideration. Let me begin. I think I said it in the lecture in my class. Let me begin by saying this. Just because you made a bad deal doesn't mean that you get out of that deal. If later you see that you could have bought a bag of beans for 50 cents, but instead you paid $50, that's on you. You negotiated the price, and come to find out it was a bad deal. Well, we don't know if this is a bad deal or not. I guess it might be a bad deal if you actually win. It might be a bad deal for the one who is suing. But if the one who is putting up just a little bit of money, he may be making a great deal. I don't know. It doesn't matter whether the exchange or the exchange of $1,000 for $50,000 without any more. While there is a large difference between the two, the exchange of $1,000 for the chance of getting $50,000, that's the question. Landowner may not be certain to win the lawsuit, so the difference in values exchange doesn't require consideration, doesn't require a conclusion that the contract lacks consideration, right? So look at that. Again, think about it in terms of making a bad deal for a bag of beans or whatever it might be. Lastly, before we go to quiz 2, the last thing I'll say is a lot of folks missed really simple questions on sources of contract law, description of common law, the default rules for governing contract law. All of those questions were taken directly from what I said in my lectures and what was taken directly from the book or the slides. So if you were unsure about an answer and you see one of those questions again on the test, go back. It's an open book quiz, open book midterm. Go back and look at it one more time. All right, let's jump over to quiz number 2. Again, same principle applies here, and folks did a lot better here on these simple questions that came straight from the lecture. But there were some other multiple choice questions here that required an analysis, and so let's go through some of those. There's not that many in week 2. All right, week 2's quiz asked about an option contract. All right, so the question dealing with the seller and buyer negotiating the purchase of a small vacant lot. Seller made a valid offer to sell the land to buyer for $10,000, and buyer, however, explained that she only has $4,000, and she expects to receive additional money of $20,000 in a few days. So seller then wrote out on a sheet of paper and signed it, "If you give me $100, then I will keep my offer open for 10 days. And buyer signed the sheet of paper, got the $100 check, and 9 days later, buyer then went to the seller's office to pay off the entire rest of the balance. I guess that check came through, and seller apologized and said he couldn't accept those payments because he'd already sold the land to somebody else 2 days prior. So the seller returned the $100 check and said, "Sorry, look forward to working with you in the future." And you're thinking, yeah, right. So if buyer sues seller for the contract, who's gonna win? Will the buyer win? So the question here is tests your knowledge on offers, firm offers, option contracts. And the word option contract, you'll note, is not actually listed in the question, but it's listed in one of the answers, actually multiple answers. So go back and reread that section of the book and rewatch the section of the lecture that deals with option contracts. Remember, for an option contract to be valid, because a offer has a set period of time, and if it's not accepted within a reasonable period of time, it lapses unless it is held over through an option contract. And the option contract must be supported by new additional consideration following the other formalities that are required for contract formation. So check this one out. Go back and reread to see under restatement section 87(1)(a) whether that would be a enforceable option contract. Because if the option was enforceable, then buyer wins. But if the option is not enforceable, then seller it lapsed, so seller could sell it to whoever he wants to. Let's go back to our father scenario. Father made the following offer to his child's tutor. Will you agree to tutor my daughter in math? If you agree to tutor her and she gets at least 90% on her math test, 1 week from the day, I'll pay you $50 for every hour that you tutored her, up to a maximum of $500. And the tutor contemplated this offer and decided not to accept it, and didn't say anything. So decided not to accept it, but did not say anything. The night before the exam, tutor decided to tutor father's daughter to see if she could actually do it. So the two girls pulled an all-nighter and Father's daughter received 95% on the exam, and father, who we have to assume from the problem here, is divorced from the mother, and the daughter lives with the mother, not the father. So the father gets so excited that the daughter did so well, the fact that she actually did have some tutoring skills. The tutor went back to the father and told father that she now accepts the offer and asks for that $500. Tutor explained that she tutored the father's daughter for 10 hours in math, and father's daughter scored well above the 90%. The two conditions. Must the father pay? So this is a convoluted question. There's a lot of facts there. This is not uncommon for the legal practice. So you got a complicated situation, and it requires you to figure out which direction you're going in, and is something a red herring. Here, the main question is, was the offer accepted? And what manner is this offer being the proposal required for acceptance? Remember, the offeror is the master of the offer. So he could say how and when is reasonable for that person to accept the offer. Okay. Does the tutor's silence in response to the offer constitute acceptance? Well, he later performed, right? He performed, but he didn't actually say, I accept. So can you accept a contract through performance? Note that there is a general rule against the silence of acceptance, but there's also exceptions to that rule. And go back and reread that particular thing. Think about lapse. Think about, think about when an offer lapses, according to the well-established presumption at the end of a face-to-face conversation. It's presumed to lapse unless the circumstances dictate otherwise. And given the father's request for a promise, not for performance, that's his request. He requests a promise, a promise. And the need for certainty about whether you're going to need to have a tutor take time to tutor the daughter. You need to determine, would a reasonable person deem under these circumstances that the offer lapsed? And if so, then no, the tutor can't prevail. But if the offer didn't lapse, look at those circumstances. Logically, the tutor could win. So a lot of people struggle with that question. I understand why. It requires you to analyze it and think logically according to how a reasonable person would. This is where some judges might make differences of opinions. But I'm telling you right now, go with the well-established presumption. At the end of a face-to-face conversation, circumstances indicate unless circumstances indicate otherwise, we're going to require a promise, not performance, in one of these contracts. Okay. Hope that wasn't too convoluted for you to understand there. Hope maybe my explanation made sense. Let's think about the mother now this time. The mother asked her adult daughter, the other daughter, to if you agree to take care of Philo, the dog, for the next 3 weekends, I would be in a position to babysit your granddaughter for 6 to 10 p.m. on Thursday nights for the next 6 weeks. Do we have an offer? So the question here goes back to the fundamental understanding of what an offer is. Remember, an offer is a manifestation of willingness to enter into a bargain. See the restatement second of contract, section 24. It's got to be reasonably made so as to justify another person to understand that his assent to the bargain is being invited and will conclude it. So the problem we have here with this particular case is that, and you need to look at it here, does the mother unequivocally express a commitment? If so, you have an offer. If not, you don't have an offer, right? Because it's got to be a manifestation of willingness so as to justify another person to rely. So the question, if you agree, I would be in a position to babysit. Doesn't say, if you agree, I will babysit, right? Okay, look at that. The next one, seller and buyer. I'll sell you $50. I'll sell you a 50-acre property for $40,000. Escrow to close in 30 days. This offer will expire in 1 week. Buyer immediately emailed back, I was hoping for a price more in the neighborhood of $35,000, $40,000. Would you consider that price? The seller responded, no, I want $40,000. And the buyer replies, okay, I'll accept your $40,000 offer. Seller responds, it's too late. You rejected my offer. Do the seller and buyer have a contract? When it was offered for $40,000, there was a $35,000 counteroffer that was then rejected. And then we've got another presumed acceptance of the $40,000 offer. So here you go back to the question of an initial response being a mirror image of what was offered. Okay, I'm not going to say anything more than that because that one should be very simple to you, right? But buyer did not have the option, right? Because buyer and seller didn't agree. Okay, so think about that in terms of that one. All right, let's move on forward to Olivia and Beatrice. We're discussing the sale of Olivia's car over drinks at a local bar. This one might remind you of a case we read, right? On a bar napkin, Olivia wrote, I agreed to sell my car to Beatrice for $1,000. Olivia and Beatrice signed the napkin. Which additional fact, if true, would cause a court to conclude that the parties actually formed a contract? Well, remember back in our reading of the case, or my discussion of the case regarding the property being sold on a napkin in a bar, and the question about whether it was all in jest or not. So basically, we go back to our understanding of what is mutual assent. An offer and acceptance must be reviewed not in the subjective intent of the parties, but the objective intent of what a reasonable person on the outside looking in would conclude. So here, what would a court need as a reasonable outside observer to conclude that there is a contract? That the parties didn't know that one side was joking, or that everybody in the room, including the two of them, knew they were joking, right? Well, that's obvious. That wouldn't help us form a contract. That'd be just the opposite, because we're looking at the outside manifestations of intent, not the internal manifestations of intent. All right, so there's a question there. Look at that. We've got a couple more here before we conclude. Let's look at the one about the birthday. Mother would reserve a clown performer for the birthday party in 30 days. So after doing some research, they found some local clowns, and Mother found one clown she liked. The clown told her that he'd perform at her birthday for $5,000. The clown explained that this was the most popular clown in town, and giving the mother a great deal because it was a very short notice and he's in high demand. And the clown and mother signed an agreement, right, for the clown to pay $14 now, and the clown could keep the $5,000 offer open for 3 days. Do they have a contract? This goes back to test the option contract and whether it needs to be accepted within a reasonable period of time. And the $14 is that additional consideration for an additional contract, an option. Look at Restatement 2nd of Contracts, Section 87(1)A, and it's testing the same concept as before. Let's talk about the concert hall. Concert hall mailed an offer to a singer to come and perform at our venue at the concert hall for April 12th through the 15th. The singer immediately mailed a properly stamped and addressed letter, unequivocally accepting the offer. 2 days later, the singer sent the concert hall a rejection using an overnight mail. The concert hall received it before the singer's acceptance, and on the day of concert, on that day, the concert hall received the rejection letter. The concert hall executed a contract with a dancer, a different person to perform. Singer then changed her mind and decided he wanted the gig, and they refused, and now we've got a lawsuit on our hand. Who's going to win? So this is your testing in the mailbox rule, right? Acceptance is generally effective on dispatch. Rejection is effective on receipt. At first glance, regardless of the order in which the acceptance or rejection is received, you need to see whether there's a contract formed based on when the singer mailed the acceptance. However, if an offer or receives the rejection before receiving the acceptance and the offeror relies on that rejection, then you might actually have a defense, right? And so think about that in terms of mailbox rule, exception to the exception, and then the defense. And that, hint, hint, may be where you find your answer. 2 more. Let's go through these real quick, and then we will conclude. Daughters negotiating the sale of deceased parents' assets with an estate company specializing in estate sales. And so the estate company sent a daughter one-page letter, sent a letter of intent signed by the company to collect, organize, and sell all public assets, right, from the decedent's house, the person who died. They're going to sell the property, the estate sale. The letter also outlined the plan for the daughter and the estate company's share in the profits. Finally, the letter specified times for the parties' performance. The letter stated that the parties reserve the right not to go forward if a final agreement is not executed within 30 days. Daughter also signed that letter as requested by the company, and daughter and estate company had no further contact. Well, finally, daughter eventually decided to sell the stuff, sell the belongings through another company, not using this one. And if Estate Co. sued for breach of contract, who's going to win? And again, this is the pattern. We're having a set of facts. You've got to find the law in your head or in our book, apply it to the set of facts, and arrive at the right answer. Who's going to win in that circumstance? Here's what you need to do. You need to read or review the readings, the restatement of second of contract regarding letters of intent. Letters of intent may or may not be contract. That depends upon the party's intent. Here, look at it and see if the parties expressly reserve the right to be released from their contractual obligation. If that is the case, then the parties did not have a contract. If the parties didn't reserve the right to be released, then you do have a contract. So that's where you need to go to find your answer. Finally, the last one before we close up. Abby lost her computer. Oh no, in the law school library. Hope that's not happened to you. On Monday, she posted a flyer on the bulletin board in exchange for getting the laptop back. And in the lounge, she said, "Lost tablet. If found, call Abby. $200 reward." Well, another student, saw the flyer, immediately started looking for the tablet. A different student called Abby and said, "I promise to find your tablet by tonight." Another student, letter C, called Abby and said, "I'll give you my computer tablet in exchange for the $200. Well, on Tuesday, Abby posted another flyer next to the original one. "I revoke my offer to give you a $200 reward in exchange for my lost tablet." Does Abby have a contract with A, B, or C, or does she have a contract with any of them? So you'll notice there are 4 answers. She's got a contract with A, she's got a contract with B, she's got a contract with C, and she doesn't have a contract with anybody. Question here becomes, this is a unilateral contract, right? So how do you accept a unilateral contract? Well, that's by completing a task, right? Abby directly revoked her offer by posting the flyer before the unilateral contract was accepted. Did any of the students, to answer your question here on A, B, C, or nobody, did any of the students actually fulfill the terms of the contract? The offer was accepted only by fulfillment of getting the tablet. That's the only way she agreed to pay that $200. That was her offer. And it could only be accepted based upon that context. So look at your facts and see which of the 3 of them, or did any of them, actually accept the contract by doing what it was that Abby asked for before she posted the flyer saying, I revoke. I've talked a lot, 45 minutes worth. I hope this video will help you go through and perform a better score on the midterm. Now notice that on the midterm, you're also going to be tested on week 4, the stuff this week and what we're learning about in the formalities of contract formation. I'm not going to, I've already given a lecture on that, so I'm not going to give any more instruction on that other than to say 2 things. Number 1, when you're faced with a simple question about when does an offer lapse, I need you to answer that question. Those answers are going to be taken directly from the book or directly from the lecture. If you're answering a question regarding a factual scenario, those questions are going to be taken from what we've reviewed so far and analyzing the facts with the law that you've been taught to find an answer of who's going to win. I hope this has helped. Everybody's doing a great job, by the way. In my class, I want to brag on you and say thank you for your diligent work. I've enjoyed reading your responses, trying to keep up with them all. If you've got any questions or comments or feedback, feel free to post that in the discussion board. In the meantime, blessings to you. I wish you the very best on the midterm and continue to do great work in the class as we move forward. Next week's Thanksgiving, but nonetheless, that we do have class, a lecture, a dialogue discussion board, and a new quiz. So don't forget to get online and take care of that business. I wish you the very best for Thanksgiving. Hope you and your family are well, and blessings to you. Have a great day. Thanks.